It's me, Jessica McCaskill, WBC, WBA Super Lightweight Unified Champion of the world. I wanted to give a big shout out to The Relay on YouTube. Check it out. Great boxing talk show. Has all the info that you need. Check it out. The Relay on YouTube.
Motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, I'm sure most of you have heard already. Anthony Joshua reportedly knocked out in sparring leading into Andy Ruiz Jr. fight. Reports have just been surfacing that Anthony Joshua may have taken some heavy punishment even before he stepped into the ring to face Andy Ruiz Jr. on Saturday night. WBN is specifically confirming that Joey DeVaco, who served as a sparring partner for Joshua in Miami, brutally knocked out the champion during a sparring session leading into the bout. Some of you probably noticed that Joshua was sporting visible wounds to his face during fight week. Well, that was supposedly courtesy of DeVaco. Some suggest that Joshua getting KO'd in sparring affected him mentally going into the fight, although Joshua himself didn't admit as much, saying that his training camp was fine, but his father, Robert Joshua, apparently wanted his son pulled from the June 1st card before it took place. And the next article is courtesy of Behind the Gloves Boxing, which states, Anthony Joshua's father has publicly stated that Joshua suffered a panic attack in his dressing room before the fight, delaying his ring walk. His father asked Eddie Hearn to call the fight off, as Joshua didn't look well and his father felt something was wrong. Eddie Hearn responded by saying he will be fine when he gets in the ring. This is the reason Anthony Joshua's father confronted Hearn in the ring after the fight and words were exchanged. I've seen a lot flying about regarding the confrontation between Eddie and AJ's dad, and the reason for it is this, according to Anthony Joshua's father, who has spoken to the media. Now, Eddie Hearn has gone on to deny such rumors. He's calling it fake news, and he's saying that there was nothing wrong with Anthony Joshua before the fight.
Called it fake news.
This is cause for conversation in many circles right now, because there are people out there who felt that there was something off about Anthony Joshua even before the first punch was thrown, that he just didn't look right, that there were certain things going on before, during, and after the fight that warrant some kind of consideration as to whether or not there's any truth in these rumors. Things that Anthony Joshua said during the fight, things that occurred post-fight. I mean, whether you believe this story or not, what cannot be denied is that Anthony Joshua's father was visibly upset with Eddie Hearn, and the question is why? I mean, Anthony Joshua didn't start boxing on Saturday night. This guy's been boxing. He suffered defeats as an amateur, and he had just suffered his first defeat as a professional. Anthony Joshua's father is just as aware of this as me and you. So why would he all of a sudden blame Eddie Hearn or lunge at him, lash out at him, have a verbal exchange with him post-fight?
Why'd he do that?
What would be the reason? Now, Anthony Joshua himself, he equated his father's outburst to emotions running high. You know, he suffered his first defeat. You know, his dad, he's dealing with it as best as he can, the only way he knows how. And, that's how Anthony Joshua explained what happens. What you have to keep in mind in all of this is that these rumors are not coming from Anthony Joshua himself. Anthony Joshua is not making any bones or any excuses as to why he lost to Andy Ruiz on Saturday night.
What do you think went wrong tonight, in your personal opinion, in your gut? Because a lot of times people are thinking that you either overtrained, you were mentally off, maybe the pressure got to you, because it's a lot, obviously, coming over here. What do you think that it was?
It's interesting because, I always say flip reverse. If I would have won tonight, there would have been nothing that went wrong. So I'm not going to blame anything. I just lost tonight. Andy Ruiz was a better man. And I got to take that on the chin. And I got to roll with the punches. So I don't want to kind of say this went wrong, that went wrong. I got a great team, man.
Other than he was just the better man. So these rumors that are circulating, they're not even coming from Anthony Joshua himself. Anthony Joshua ain't making excuses for what happened. But in spite of that, these rumors are still circulating. And naturally, people want to know why. Because a lot of people, most of which are Anthony Joshua's supporters, have mixed feelings, unresolved perspectives in regards to how should they look at this fighter moving forward, it being that he didn't live up to their expectations.
What happened?
They want to know what happened to the guy that picked himself up off the canvas in the Klitschko fight. They want to know what happened to the guy that weathered hard shots from not only Dillian White, but Carlos Takam, Alexander Povetkin, and Vladimir Klitschko. They want to know what happened to that guy and why all of a sudden he evaporated.
Against Ruiz.
It's the reason that these rumors are going to strike a chord with them the most. And to that, I will say this.
Pay attention.
To me personally, whether or not this story checks out is besides the point. If it's true that Anthony Joshua went forward with the Andy Ruiz fight, having been concussed in sparring by Joey DeVaco, if that story checks out, it's kind of besides the point, and it doesn't change anything.
Why not?
The reason for that is, okay, Joey DeVaco is in camp with you to help you prepare for Andy Ruiz. And the relevance of Joey DeVaco is that he has very similar dimensions to Andy Ruiz. He's a portly fellow like Andy Ruiz. He's got experience, though he's never competed at the same level as Andy, but better still, he's there to mimic Andy. Thus, if in fact Joey DeVaco caught Anthony Joshua with a hard shot in sparring that left him concussed, it's likely that Andy Ruiz would have caught him with the same shot anyway because Andy's got faster hands than Joey. So whether or not Anthony Joshua got dropped in sparring and he was concussed going into the fight, or he didn't get dropped in sparring and it's all a rumor,
Any way you slice it.
it all still denotes the same defensive deficiency. That whether it's as a result of something that Joey did, or it's just as a result of what Andy did. Either way you slice it, it's the same defensive deficiency, and that's what he needs to work on moving forward, and that's why it's irrelevant to Saturday night's fight. Because maybe did Joey catch him with a shot in sparring, you know? Maybe he did. Lots of things happen in sparring. People get dropped in sparring all the time. And maybe he got dropped in sparring. But if he did in fact get dropped in sparring, it's because that defensive deficiency was already there. And it's likely something that Andy Ruiz would capitalize on. So, ladies and gentlemen, if it's your intention to use this rumor as a means to excuse or explain away what happened in Saturday night's fight, do realize that it all goes back to the same thing.
How so?
That if you're telling yourself, well, Joshua lost the fight because he was concussed, the question then becomes, okay, how'd he get concussed? Because Joey DeVaco dropped him. Okay, well, why'd Joey DeVaco drop him? Because of a defensive deficiency. A defensive deficiency that was already there. That particular style, coming from a fighter with those particular characteristics, those physical dimensions, hampered Anthony Joshua
abilities
already. And that's why he got nailed in the first place. Thus, the rumor itself is besides the point. And this is something that Anthony Joshua is going to have to work on moving forward. I.e., no excuses. There are no excuses. And Anthony Joshua isn't making any, so you shouldn't either. You know that I don't actually find this rumor hard to believe at all. It all makes perfect sense. It explains why he looked the way that he looked. Before, during, and after the fight, it explains certain of the things we saw, like Anthony Joshua's father lashing out at Eddie Hearn and all this coming out that Anthony Joshua's father wanted the fight called off. It all makes perfect sense. So, for anyone who believes this rumor, they are then left with things to reconcile. Like, okay, if you believe that he was concussed, then why did Eddie Hearn allow him to go out there in that condition? And the answer to that question is simple. I mean, I know that there are a lot of people that are going to try to use this to vilify Eddie Hearn. But need I remind you that those kinds of people have always been around. There's always been a group of guys that have been trying to paint him out to be the bad guy, and they're gonna jump at the opportunity to use this to make him out to be the bad guy, when in reality, you know, if Anthony Joshua was concussed and they decided to go out there anyway, that's really not even Eddie Hearn's fault, because the rumor is that he was concussed in sparring only 8 days before the fight. 8 days before the fight, it's too late to call it off. It's too late to pull out. The venue's already been booked. The tickets have already been sold. The card is decked out and everything is ready to go. At only 8 days, you can't call it off now. It's too late. So if you're wondering, you know, if you're asking yourself, well, if Joshua was concussed, why'd they go ahead with the fight? The answer to that is obvious. The answer to that is simple. It's because it's too goddamn late. You can't pull out now. And the real question is, if this story checks out, and the rumors are true, that Anthony Joshua was concussed in sparring, and they decided to go ahead with the fight, the real question is, why was he doing any kind of hard sparring only 8 days before the fight in the first place? Use your heads, kids. If you're doing any kind of hard sparring only 8 days before the fight, that only leaves you 8 days to recuperate. If you get a cut, if you get concussed, if you pull a fucking muscle, you hurt your shoulder, whatever happens, that would only leave you with 8 days to recover. So the real question really isn't, why did they decide to go on anyway? The question is, why was he doing any kind of hard sparring in the first place? Why would Rob McCracken have this guy doing any kind of hard sparring so soon to the fight? It seems to me that if this rumor checks out, it's not Eddie Hearn that people need to be looking at. It's actually Rob McCracken, because he's the one who's in charge of Anthony Joshua's training regimen. He's the one who's supposed to strategize and develop the techniques and tactics for Anthony Joshua to employ on the night of the fight. It's actually his job to develop that strategy. Eddie Hearn is a promoter. He's going to promote.
He's not a trainer.
Whereas, in the case of Rob McCracken, you really should know better than to have your guy doing any kind of hard sparring so soon to the fight. If he gets injured, that only leaves him 8 days to recuperate. And if this story checks out, then it further drives my point home that perhaps Anthony Joshua may need to make some additions to his training team. That Rob McCracken's done a good job. I mean, we're not going to cast aside everything he's done so far for this fighter based on one professional loss. We're not going to do that. We're boxing fans. We're not that short-sighted. But what we can say is that perhaps Anthony Joshua needs a bit more insights. A bit more hands on deck. Because if this story checks out and they had this guy doing any kind of hard sparring only 8 days before a fight, well, that's a recipe for disaster. And it's not actually Eddie Hearn's job to oversee that aspect of Anthony Joshua's career. That's Rob McCracken's job. And if this story's true, then he should have fucking known better. Because if something happens to the fighter in those remaining 8 days, you've effectively painted that fighter and his promoter into a corner. And you know what? If this rumor checks out, that's the way it looks. That's the way it seems to me. That a lapse in judgment on the part of Anthony Joshua's training team may have painted him and Eddie Hearn into a corner to where they've got to go ahead with a fight while the fighter is compromised. And that could create the perfect storm. The perfect storm that could see something like this happening. Something shocking. And in the sport of boxing, you hear it all the time. That any given night, anything can happen, but it doesn't really register until anything actually does happen. In this instance, one of the more shocking upsets we've seen in recent memory in the sport of boxing. The last 10, 15 years. I mean, I don't recall an upset this big, quite this big, in a very long time. And the whole fiasco, the whole rumor in regards to Anthony Joshua possibly being concussed, none of this is being said to diminish Andy Ruiz's victory, because at the end of the day, Andy Ruiz has to be a capable enough boxer to capitalize on what defensive holes Anthony Joshua affords him, and it just so happens that that's what he did. I can't tell you that I picked Andy Ruiz to win this fight. I can't tell you that, but what I can tell you is I cautioned that mid-range to inside, this fucking guy's dangerous.
Give Joshua the benefit of the doubt because Ruiz is a good fighter. Arguably, he beat Joseph Parker, and he's a formidable opponent.
Yeah, but you know what the shit about the Ruiz fight is, and I'm going to say it. I know motherfuckers probably wouldn't want to believe it coming from me, but Ruiz is dangerous. Ruiz is a short heavyweight that Joshua has to punch down to hit. Ruiz could slip the shot, end up mid-range to inside, and if he gets there, Joshua is in fucking trouble.
Let's be real, man. That little flesh ball can move, man. You know what I'm saying?
He can. And I would say this too. I would say this too. Andy Ruiz has a speed advantage when it comes to hand speed against Anthony Joshua.
He does. He
has that speed advantage, and that's the thing that could be a little scary for Joshua. Because if Joshua try to fight him up close, trying to throw those hooks, Andy Ruiz is going to counter him back with the 1-2 combination, or 1-2-3 combination.
But look, Dan, the question is, does he have enough power to hurt? Does Andy Ruiz, does he carry enough power to hurt?
Man, I'm telling you, man, that little flesh ball. Hey, look, let me tell you something.
Listen to me.
Let Rick get it.
Parker gave Andy Ruiz more respect than he gave Anthony Joshua. Watch the fight. Joseph Parker gave Andy Ruiz's punch more respect than he gave Anthony Joshua's. The kid can punch. That's what I'm telling. I know motherfuckers ain't gonna want to believe it coming from me. They're gonna think I'm trying to sell a fight.
Ring. I'm gonna be honest.
That is a clip from Dan the Man's Boxing Podcast. Shout out to Dan. I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. A video that was made a day or so before the fight took place, where we discussed what threat level does Andy Ruiz pose to Anthony Joshua. And anybody that follows this channel will already know. I said it in plain fucking English. Mid-range to inside, Andy Ruiz is a dangerous guy. He's got hand speed, he's got quick counters, and Anthony Joshua's got to work to not give up his height to that guy. Get full extension on your punches and keep him at the end of the jab. Now, Anthony Joshua, I reiterate, he had his man hurt. But what he should have did was continue to string punches together from the outside. Straight punches that would have kept his chin out of harm's way and out of Andy Ruiz's quick counters. But Anthony Joshua, he ended up going in for the kill when he saw he had his man hurt.
Got greedy.
And as a result of that, he got hit with a hard shot that he never quite recovered from. Now, to those people out there who believe the rumors, you can argue that yes, Anthony Joshua having gone into the fight concussed would then have to mean that the first hard shot with anything on it that lands is going to render him disabled, that he's compromised. But to that, I'll say what I said before, that okay, if he went into the fight concussed, how'd he get concussed? Because Joey DeVecco dropped him. Okay, why Joey DeVecco dropped him? Because of the same defensive deficiency. The same defensive deficiency that costed him the fight against Andy Ruiz. There are some things they're going to need to work on, and that's fine. Look, fighters lose fights all the time. The Mayweather era, and nothing against Floyd Mayweather, because that's just a testament to his excellence. But at the end of the day, the Mayweather era convinced a lot of people that fighters can't bounce back from losses, and that's got to be the most retarded fucking thing to say in the sport of boxing. Because Henry Armstrong, one of the greatest fighters that the sport has ever seen, racked up at least 3 professional losses before he even had 10 fights. Bernard Hopkins, we talk about him all the time. He lost his very first professional fight. Jessica McCaskill, the unified 140-pound champion, she lost 2 fights before she became a unified champion. Maeva Hamadouche, the IBF super featherweight champion, recent addition to the women's Ring IQ pound-for-pound list with Delphine Persoon having been bumped off. Maeva Hamadouche, she lost a fight. She lost a fight to Delphine Persoon, but she became a champion after that. And what I'm trying to communicate to you guys is that more often than not, fighters do bounce back from losses, but you've got to give them the opportunity to do that before you jump to conclusions. Ultimately, time is going to tell the story, regardless of what opinions me and you might have. You might think Anthony Joshua can bounce back. You might think he can't. But ultimately, time and Anthony Joshua's efforts along with his team's, that's going to be what tells the story. But the idea that you should write the guy off altogether just because he lost one fucking fight proves how big a fucking casual you are. Proves how little you know about this sport. There was always a possibility that Andy could upset the plans. However big or small that possibility is besides the point. Because the possibility was there, and there were those out there that acknowledged that Andy's got a shot. Might not be a great shot, but he does have a shot. Whereas there were other people out there who wrote him off altogether. Coincidentally, those are the same fucking people that are trying to sit here today acting like they told you so. Like they picked Andy to win. You know, the most mouthy motherfuckers right now are the guys who were criticizing Andy. So all of a sudden you're gonna act like you predicted this? Give me a fucking break, okay? You should probably lie to yourself in private where nobody can call you on your own bullshit.